Boom. Awesome. Well, that was really loud. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the FlyOverThinkers. Got a good one today. I think it's a little more relaxed conversation, but I think it'll be a lot of fun. As with us as always, we have Eric Johnson. How are you today, sir?
Pretty good. How you doing, gentlemen?
All right, hanging in there. And then, as usual, John Paulson.
Hello. It's great to see you guys tonight to share this time, and thanks to everybody who's tuning in to listen to us.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I forgot the mug. I got my cat mug back. Right. So we'll just dive into this, right? And I feel like it's timely because the body positivity movement is taken off quite a bit, and um, on social media, people kind of go after each other for different things. So we wanted to talk about tonight. We want to talk about this idea of beauty. And what it looks like. What is beauty? Like what, and we can, say it from a male's perspective or whatever. We can, or just like this central idea. So so let's just start with like whenever I say beauty, what comes to mind for you guys?
Well, for me, I think everything's kind of contextual. Just hearing the word, I get flooded with all kinds of images. Which uh, a little bit ago, I Googled the word beauty and hit images, and literally every image was either of a woman or makeup. So I changed the word to beautiful, and it changed the images to either women or like nature scenery. So I wonder what kind of like conditioning or programming that sort of, results on the, I don't know. It was just kind of bizarre that that's the image that you get when you search, for a beautiful image. It's either of a woman or nature.
Yeah, men are never beautiful, are we? I
No,
feel
no.
we used to be. We used to be like a couple thousand years ago. It used to be the standard of beauty was men, but not all men. Just just a handful. I don't know, John. What do you think? Beauty.
Well, Eric, I think you're beautiful. Josh, you're beautiful. And what I bring to this conversation tonight is that I am the ugly duckling. So I get the role tonight of being the most unattractive person on this podcast. So I will hold up that candle. So it's interesting. And Eric, I like to piggyback on what you said because that is interesting. I was listening to another commentator talk about if you type certain things into Google, the images it shows up. And sometimes what it pulls up is you're like, wow, Google's trying to like send me a message or program me something that's not really what I asked it to look for. And so that's interesting there because, and we talked about this a little bit, I think, right before the podcast. Like when you say the term beautiful, what automatically comes into my mind is thinking about things that are aesthetically pleasing, such as maybe outside today, a wonderful fall day with the leaves or the sky or, like art and things like that. Now, when we're talking about physical beauty, then another term that comes up for me is attractiveness and how we as human beings and as guys actually start to define that, and then the relationship between beautiful and attractive. They're related, but I don't think that they're the same thing. So I'm kind of like Eric's Google search, which is, when I think of beauty or beautiful, there's sort of a split between things that are just aesthetically pleasing and then also thinking about beauty in the form of attractiveness as in physical appearance for us as people.
I
Yeah, I'm
would
sure
agree
on
with
like
that.
a Venn diagram there would definitely be an overlap there. I'm with you. It's like I said, it's kind of contextual for me, because it's depending on what context. But yeah, there's definitely beauty and attractiveness separate and together, in one little a little Venn diagram, I think so.
Mhm. I once heard it said that this idea that you can, everyone is beautiful, or you can find beauty in everyone, but not everyone is attractive, which is true because I think there's a certain element of so let's dive into this notion of objective beauty, which I think is hard to grasp at, but I feel like there's some science behind it that proves some element of objective beauty. A lot of times it comes with symmetry, right? Whereas attractiveness is more subjective. Um, and some might say beauty is also subjective, which I agree, similarly to attractiveness, but there is some overarching constants for everyone when it comes to this notion of beauty, particularly around this concept of symmetry. When we're talking about people's faces, like more symmetrical faces tend to be labeled as beautiful, or than say non-symmetrical faces.
Yeah, I think it's interesting and it's fascinating. I mean, it truly is. And I didn't do my homework for this because we decided on this at the last moment. So I'm sure that there's that body of research out there and somebody is way more knowledgeable on it than I am. But I can remember, again, it's fascinating that in social psychology, when they look at this, which is what do people rate as more attractive or more desirable, there's some fairly typical dimensions that come out, and that tends to be replicated over time, over settings, over populations, which it's interesting. And symmetry is part of that, like you said, Josh. And so to me, again, we go back to, we always talk about, and I'm gonna be nice to Josh tonight because last time, we're able to make space for both some biological contributions to our human nature, but then we also know that it is all contextual, like Eric said, and that there is a very strong social learning, environmental, cultural point. And I think, beauty is one of those things where obviously it would make sense that there are certain things about physical appearance and attractiveness that are tied into attracting mates. It's like mate selection. So part of that comes into attracting mates, desirability. Part of that goes into maybe some aspects of physical appearance that appear tied to health, which also might go into reproductive viability. Other species, I think they use this a lot better than we do because especially they have the use of smell more in tune than we do, different smells, different pheromones. So part of it does seem tied to attracting reproductive partners. And that could either be just through physical aesthetics or just these physical characteristics that seem to suggest better genes, better health, or maybe just sort of like better in the form of protection, maybe, like a sense of, of being kind of built that way. I was thinking the other night, my wife and I rewatched this video clip of these birds that are doing these mating dances and again attracting a mate. And so this bird, kind of fluff themselves out and they're doing this little dance, and it's just like kind of amazing. You think about it and you're like, well, we do that too. We just don't pay attention to it as much anymore. So it's interesting that probably some of that replication in the scientific and social scientific literature probably does connect to some things that we can't always articulate, but probably does connect to that underlying drive towards mate attraction and the way that relates to successful reproduction as far as healthy viability, desirability, things like that. But then obviously beyond that, kind of go into that whole realm of beauty, is that you always see now as we get older, I really appreciate the wisdom in certain old phrases. And we have that old phrase, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Like Eric said, it's incredibly contextual because what we define as appealing or attractive varies over the course of history. It varies over the course of culture. It varies even within cultures. And so there is a lot of truth that everyone has a certain amount of beauty. Because all of us are going to have some very nuanced ways of defining what we find appealing, attractive, and beautiful. So to me, this topic of attractiveness or beauty truly is, and I'm being sincere here, it's an amazing combination of probably some biological underpinnings, but that is incredibly socially, culturally constructed, and then goes through our own prism of individual preferences. And
I don't know. I hear you, and I agree definitely the context and the social aspect of it. And this is probably going to be weird coming from Mr. Sociologist, but when we're talking about specifically beauty, I don't know if I agree with the eye of the beholder. I think attractiveness, like what draws you to it, that is definitely subjective. But I lean more towards, if we're talking about pure beauty, this notion of like a sense of awe when you see it. I feel like there's some objective, a lot more objective nature to it, some more like specific components to it. I get what you're saying though, but I don't know. I feel like, because even when we talked about how men now, it seems that we find women as more definitive as beauty, but we used to be men. But even in those times, say ancient Greek and Roman, like the men had a certain aesthetic, and it actually may be the difference between beauty and aesthetic. Like maybe aesthetic is the more subjective term, and whereas beauty kind of becomes more of this objective ideal. I don't know. This thought.
Well, I think with John was mentioning the pheromones and the smelling and the difference in nature versus people. I think it's less socially acceptable for people to walk around smelling for mates. You go up and sniff a stranger, and you're going to get arrested.
Well, it's not acceptable unless you happen to be the president of the United States.
Oh,
yeah, that is true. Old Sniffy, he can get away with it. Yeah, like you were talking about how it kind of changes over the course of time and society, but I think it kind of changes over the course of your own life too. How you define beauty. Like in my younger years, you might see a chick that looks kind of not so well put together, or like, oh, she likes to party, like she looks fun, or you see somebody as you get older and you're like, she's got her shit together, like that's hot, like she's not going to be a headache at all, like. So the way you perceive attractiveness, I think, changes over time within yourself, not just culture or society too. So
yeah, like there's a comic, I wish I could remember his name, but he always made the joke. He said, beauty might be skin deep, but ugly goes straight to the bone, and sometimes that ugliness is not just physical. And I agree with you, Eric. I was talking with my brother about this one time. And now, again, this isn't true for all men, but we had a shared experience, that, we always talk about, guys always being attracted to, much younger women. There's a certain part of your life where you kind of look at that and you're like, yeah. And then you get to a point of your life and you're like, no, there is nothing that would make me put up with that headache, so you start to see that attractiveness or beauty is not just about physical appearance or physical desirability. It also comes down to, is like we talked about before, is this somebody who I value? Do I want to share time with them? Hey, do I like them? Do they have their life together? Do we have the similar interest and commitments? That starts to become, that becomes very attractive. That one of my buddies was like, one of the most attractive things that I find about a woman is somebody that has more money in the bank than I do. So, it's like, who can pay their bills. So, those things change over time. And I think that's a good thing. And I think that's something that we don't recognize enough. Sometimes, maybe especially as guys, we can get fixed in this very limited view of what's desirable or what's attractive. And it's important for us, I think, to be open to the way that changes over time and the way hopefully that refines itself or improves itself over time.
I think there's a certain class element to this too, that exactly to what you guys are talking about. Because I had a conversation just a couple days ago over a guy here in town who we'll just say he rubs shoulders or elbows with a lot of very rich people, but not old money and not super rich, but that middle range rich, what we would call the nouveau riche, right? Guys that are upwards of 10 to, we'll say, $100 million. That's how much they're worth. But they're usually young guys, right? Um, their so their concept of beauty is commodified. Like they want beautiful women around them, um, for the sense of a to draw attention to themselves, but B, it's not about attraction so much as it is to create this image, right? This lifestyle image that utilizes this idea of beauty, supermodels or attractive women, and that's usually who it is. It's women. Um, that are then become decoration. So it's really interesting to see the difference. Just as, we're talking about what is attractive and beauty to us, is someone who has money in the bank, someone who has their shit together, someone who's not going to cause me a lot of stress, who's a healthy person, versus someone like that. Their sense of beauty is a physical aesthetic, and it's for a purpose, as opposed to like a mate or something like that. It's just this image of that they're trying to create for themselves. It's really terrifying in some ways, but I mean, I get it.
And for those of you that might have missed it, make sure to go back and listen to our podcast where we talked about the
high value
male, where we talk about these issues even more. Which again, but Josh, you're exactly right, because again, that goes back into class, context, and what people are trying to get out of relationships or possessions. And like we said before, it's including when people start to see other people as possessions, especially a romantic partner, and most commonly guys viewing women that way.
Yeah. So this whole conversation, or the whole topic, came about as a conversation with my lady friend. She would be mad if I called her my lady friend, the girlfriend, Melanie, whatever. We were talking about makeup because she wanted to stop at Sephora or something like that. Of course, I can't let go of certain things. They just trigger conversations, and my ADHD brain's like, you need to talk about that right fucking now. So immediately came out, and I've always had this thought that makeup companies, and this kind of goes along with what Eric was saying when he Googled beauty, this idea of makeup. For me, I struggle with makeup companies because makeup companies are insidious, and everyone's going to argue with me, just as she did at first. Makeup companies, like, you makeup counter people and things like that who want to do makeovers, like, oh, you're not doing this right, and blah, blah, blah. To me, makeup is both the problem and the solution, in that they tell women, or they convince women subversively, that they are ugly, and then offer the solution. That's how it works. Like, if a woman thinks she's pretty without makeup, she's not going to fucking buy it. Cosmetics and things like that, she's not going to buy it. So it's this underlying tone of like, all right, so we need to convince these women that they are not attractive, that the only way to be attractive is if they buy our products, the solution that we're going to offer. And it's so fascinating to me that, like, it's such an insidious racket, but yet we don't ever think about it. And of course, I'm going to get I'm sure I might get some flack for it. People disagreeing, like, I wear makeup because it makes me feel good. Well, why in the fuck does it make you feel good? Because I can look pretty. And I don't know. So that's where this conversation came from.
Well, and I agree with you because then it ties to all of these preconceived ideas and definitions and notions of what's beautiful, what's desirable, and then that gets filtered through culture, and place in history. So the whole thing, well, it makes me feel better about myself. Well, why does it make you feel better about yourself? It's because it helps you to feel closer to some type of an ideal image. One thing I want to add that real quick. So any, besides Josh, probably any other sociologist or social scientist researchers about to develop a nervous twitch in the left side of their face with probably how broad and unspecific I'm being, but just to paint kind of a general theme. Many people here recently have been talking about the person who worked at Facebook that came forward and said, listen, Facebook and Instagram, their social media is really harmful to kids and adolescents, especially young girls. And everybody's like, well, no shit, we know that. And it's not just social media, even though it's amplified it. You go back and you look at the magazines that are targeted towards fashion and women and the cosmetic commercials and advertisements, and it's the same thing. That's also unhealthy. One of the social psychologists that I worked as a research assistant for one time was replicating a study. This is the general of it. I might be getting some specifics wrong, but you basically kind of bring in two groups of, young college age women, because like Josh said before, we know a whole lot about college age people. That's the research we do. But you have these two groups. And so like, let's say one group, you had them look through like Better Homes and Gardens, where they're just looking at nature images. They're just looking at flowers. And then the other ones, you have them look through fashion magazines. And so then after they spend some time going through these magazines, you have them rate their self-image, their proportionality, and their satisfaction with their body image. And repeatedly, the women that go through that priming condition of looking at all of these exaggerated and I would say unrealistic images of what beauty is, they consistently rate their body proportion, their body image higher than it is or the other group, and their satisfaction with their sense of self-image is lower. So we know this has an impact, and it has throughout, all of history. And this kind of goes into this whole kind of class issue and maybe even sort of like socioeconomic, kind of these terms are falling out of popularity, but like you look at what's called an industrialized or developed nation, first world nation, whatever we want to say, is that so in eating disorder research, eating disorders can happen to anyone, anytime, anywhere in the world. So we shouldn't forget that, and we should realize that's an important issue no matter who's affected. So I'm not minimizing anyone's eating disorder anywhere. But if you want to look at statistics, almost all of the diagnoses of eating disorders happen in first world Western nations. That has to say something. And actually, even though the rate of males being diagnosed with eating disorders is on the rise, and so that's important too, but we also have to realize that still upwards of like 90% plus of anyone that's diagnosed with an eating disorder is female. So there really is something going on here with these messages that history and culture and media have been telling women about what it means to look pretty, to feel good about yourself. And so, Josh, what you said just triggered me for a second. I said too much, but I think that is an important part that we have to kind of look at some of the negative effect that industry has had on the way that we think about and talk about and define this.
Well, I think eating disorders in, say third world countries or, places where they have people that are actually starving to death, I don't think that beauty is going to take priority over living. Here in the States, you have that luxury of starving yourself, whether it's to change your image or to get attention or, whatever reasons people do that. But in a country that, you don't have much of an option, you have to eat when you can. I think that beauty kind of takes a back seat to that. So that might be a factor in why it happens.
It is. And real quick, and then Josh, I want to hear your view, but back one or two podcasts ago, whatever topic we were talking about, and I quoted Sigmund Freud from Civilization and Its Discontent, that the consequence of civilization is neurosis, having these emotional hangups and this anxiety-based existence. I think you're right, Eric, that one of the effects of living in a place and time of plenty is it creates a lot of issues that people that are starving and having to survive aren't necessarily facing. But Josh, I mean, we used to do a bunch out. What's your reaction?
No, and it's interesting where it comes from, right? And in this conversation with her, I was mentioning that we get our beauty standards from society. Why, the message is there's a kind of a trope going around, or not a trope, but a saying or phrase or idea that women dress for themselves, they wear makeup for themselves, things like that. And I get that. I get that initial thought that I do this for myself. But where does that come from? Where does that need to do that, or that desire to do that come from? And comes from, and I argue that it comes from society. It comes from this sense of needing to look as best you can, especially for women. Men don't always have that same thing, but for women particularly, looking a certain way, expectations of clothes and things like that. But the magic of it, or I guess the other, insidious part of it, is that a lot of times it comes from other women. The beauty standards that we look at, I argue, come from other women, or not to call them out, but gay men. Gay men run a lot of the fashion industry, a lot of the cosmetic industry, and so do women. Like, I don't feel a lot of your standard men like us are having that great of an impact of expectation of certain looks or certain aesthetics. We are told that this is what's supposed to be beautiful, I think, or what's supposed to be attractive. We're kind of fed those images, and we're like, oh, okay, that's fine. And you can look through consumption and how those things are reinforced. Like, we buy products to because we're sold them, or sex is applied to them, or certain aesthetics are applied to them. Look at any beer commercial, right? But the truth being is that the aesthetic that's often sold to us, that we try to buy, is not usually the aesthetic that most people like. There's a famous silhouette study that was done where they had all the different sizes, women, the silhouettes, and they were asked to pick who was the most attractive. And we're sold this image. I think this was done in the 90s, early 2000s. That's kind of when I first heard about it. And during that time, we were sold the image of the supermodel, skinny, especially in the 90s. We had the heroin supermodel look. Remember, like Kate Moss, or she was rail thin. Like, that was the image of beauty. But the results of the study showed that it was women that were like a size 10 or 12, maybe even a 14, like in that range, were always picked more than the skinny supermodel.
Yep.
So
go ahead, Josh.
So when we're looking at this idea of what is beautiful, and this idea of consumption, and who is it actually being marketed to, and this kind of social notion of attraction, especially when it unfortunately falls on the shoulders of women, it's like, understand that it's not always men. Yeah, men are buying the products, but the people supplying it are often not us.
Yep. So I'm going to possibly get myself in trouble here, but I want to throw out I'm not going to call it a theory, because using that term in its proper scientific term, this is not a theory. Let's just say it's a working model or hypothesis I'm putting forward that might get me in trouble. And
an educated speculation.
Yeah, that's right. An educated speculation. And I'm going to use some terms that I don't always like. But so this obviously is coming from a very heterosis normative view. So I just want to acknowledge that up front. And that's the language I'm going to use, even though I'm sure we could break it down more. But using that, like you said, Josh, maybe where do some of those ideas or expectations or standards come from? I think what happens is that, going back to the high value males, when you look at some of the, and we're going to use this in the situation, just the idea of males, when you look at some of the ones that are seen as the most desirable because of either their physical status or attributes, or their material status and attributes, what they can provide, when you look at what those guys define as desirable, like, how people should be, then that actually skews the perception. That filters down into women and gay men. But let's just stick with women. So what happens is that since now there becomes this script about this is the way you need to look to attract a potential partner, a potential mate who has a sense of status, dominance, and resources, then what happens is, because like what made me think of this, we said, well, I dress up for myself. And sometimes you hear, well, I don't dress up for guys, I dress up for other women. And I actually believe that because I believe that one of the ways that female hierarchy plays out, and we know that we're hierarchical creatures as great apes, we talked about it before, and that's true for both guys and girls. Some of the way that status, dominance, and hierarchy plays out, I think especially for women, has to do with the way that physical appearance and what is seen as attractiveness plays a role in power, privilege, and influence. Now, some of that power is interpersonal. So it's not just attracting physical mates, but also attracting people that are going to be in a relationship with me, that are going to take care of me. They're going to give me emotional affection. They're going to, be, good in grooming me. So not just romantic, but because when I mean, kind of working in two professions where I have now had the kind of the Diane Fossey Gorillas in the Mist, where I'm kind of behind the bushes taking notes, listening to lots of conversations that are playing out among females. I'm amazed at how often the conversations focus on, well, oh my gosh, well, her hair is so nice, or what, her cheekbones, or like, her hips, like all these things. Like, well, I wish I looked like that, or I wish I looked like she did. There's this sort of like clamoring over these physical traits and wishing to kind of look a certain way. And I think that connects back to that sense of status and dominance. So I do think sometimes that women are dressing that way to feel better about themselves because it connects to that, or it's connecting to this idea that other women are going to look at them in an approving way and are going to give them sort of like a sense of clout or status. Like, oh, I wish that I would, kind of look like her, or wish I, my hair was like hers, makeup was like hers, like all this stuff. And it doesn't have, it's not about, romantic or sexual, like you said. It's more just about like desirability. Let me stop there, but that's kind of my view. I think that it kind of starts with who tends to be the highest status, highest dominance provider with a sense of the resources, and then what do they attract? And then what they attract kind of gets filtered into what is generally desirable. And then that's not just about romantic or intimacy. It then just becomes about what should I have when I'm around other people? Let me stop. Does that make any sense at all?
It does. I think, and this is just, one of the hypotheses that it's not a theory. Maybe some of the beauty standards, that come from Hollywood actually come from their insurance companies, because if you're thinner and you're working on a movie set, you're less likely to get shot.
There you go.
If you're a smaller target, sorry, I had to take a jab. Is it too soon?
You're also less likely to come down with lead poisoning.
Was it too soon for that one? So yeah, I'm with you, John. I think a lot of the all these beauty companies, all these makeup companies, they definitely play on people's insecurities, and there's no shortage of insecurities out there. Like, people will forever be unsatisfied with the way they look if they think there's something better. And that's, everybody that does all the dieting and weight loss, and a lot of people are trained to get on a scale and equate a number with progress. And I always tell people that get so obsessed with a number that if you don't like who you see in the mirror, every number that you see on the scale is going to disappoint you. So you're not going to find contentment. You're not going to find satisfaction in a number that's displayed on a scale. So in instances like that, you'd be better served to throw the scale out the window. But, you mentioned like cheekbones and hair and, all these things that if women were genuinely satisfied with the way they look and they didn't feel that insecurity, you wouldn't be hearing those conversations. Everybody's going to be envious of something that if they see something better than something that's a target of their insecurity, they're going to covet that. And makeup companies know that they create, they create those customers by playing on their insecurities. They're going to encourage people to feel like they're not enough unless they have this product.
And Eric, that's a great point. And I want to come back to that important comment about like the numbers on the scale. But I just want to mention this too, that two of the things that kind of started to make me think about this is more about status, hierarchy, attractability were two things. And hand on the Bible, this is, God's honest truth. One of the things that kind of clued me into this, well, one of them is like, our students, when they're going into professional settings, is that we you have to talk to them about, encourage them about dress codes at different companies and about, and a lot of times that means kind of dressing up more than you would for the classroom, kind of, not like black tie or anything, but like kind of business casual or a little bit even more kind of business formal. And I remember listening to one of the students, and it was a group of girls talking to each other. And one of the students said, I'm actually looking forward to internship so that I have a reason to dress up without people going, well, who does she think she is? Who is she trying to attract? So it's almost like and part of my head was like, well, why don't you just dress up because you want to dress up? But it's almost like this, oh no, I have to have a reason to dress up, because if not, I'm sending a signal that's trying to put me out there above other women. And within kind of woman culture, that's sort of like a bad sign that you can't be trying to make yourself look better or different or not fitting into a context. I was like, that's curious. And the other one was, I've had the privilege of sitting in on a lot of interviews for hiring for positions, these professional positions. I can remember this one committee I was on. There were two of us that were guys, and there were about 4 women. I mean, we're all professionals, all master's degree or above, just as a context, and there were these, kind of women that we were interviewing the position. And seriously, what I'm clued into and noticing is I'm asking about and making note of their education, their past work experience, where it was, what they did, projects they worked on. And I was amazed after the interview was done, one of the first things that these other females, these professionals would start to talk about was making comments on and criticisms of the degree of the makeup, how they wore it, whether it was fitting to the setting, whether they seemed to be sort of like put together for the context. Or I can't believe you'd wear something like that to an interview. Like they noticed. I couldn't have told you the color of these women's hair. I really couldn't have. I mean, because I didn't notice it. But it's almost like they were first sort of looking at, okay, what physical signals are going on? Is this person put together? Does their hair and their makeup kind of not only fit them, but does it fit the setting? Is anything else they're wearing, does it seem to accent that? Or does it not go with that or the setting? And I'm like, that's a lot of calculation and consideration that I wasn't even looking at. I mean, I must have been the asshole. I'm just looking at how did you perform at your last job?
Well, and that might be a biological thing too. Most guys, they have a different generalization, a different way of summing up a room. They're like, can I screw it, eat it, or kill it? That's how they, they look at somebody and kind of scan the room, and that's some of their, first thoughts. Whereas a female, it's, they're comparing themselves to that person. Well, if I was in this position, that's. So it just might be a different way of how they look at things. Because, yeah, I wouldn't think of hair or makeup in an interview setting at all, but
Yeah.
they consider that important because if that role was reversed, if they were walking into an interview, those are things that they would be putting a lot of emphasis on.
And it has to
Do
do
I
with,
look,
yeah, it has to do with
put together?
status, dominance, hierarchy, kind of like it really does seem to go into it. But let me put that on a shelf for a second because
Competition. Hold on a second. Let me jump in there.
Okay.
I think it has to do with a different style of competition, or the jumping on John's biological imperative here that women have a sense of competition, men do as well. Like when I walk into a room, just because I'm a big guy, I'm always like, am I the biggest guy in here? Just a thing that I do. I think it's funny, and it always makes me uncomfortable when people are bigger than me, but that's a different thing. Like taller than me, I realize I'm like at the low end of heighted people, but whenever I walk in a room and see someone who's like 6'5" or above, I don't know, it makes me uncomfortable for some reason because I'm like, why is this person so big? Like I'm big, but I'm like not abnormally big. But I feel like when they're that big, they're like, I don't know what to, like my neck doesn't bend that way to look up. Anyway, digressing. But women have I think a different sense of competition. And I want to go back to your comment about the people doing the internships and a sense to wanting a reason to dress up, or they get judged for it. And I think that's an age thing. I think the older you get, like you can dress up however you want. No one's going to say anything to you. Like plus, like I feel like for men particularly, you get to a certain age, you can dress up all the time, and like then you're dapper. Then it's a different context. Everybody likes an old man who's all decked out and stylish all the time. Like that's not a thing. So I feel like that's a thing for younger folks who are still very much like in secret competition with each other, and they don't know, like trying to figure themselves out and that kind of thing. I also think that might be a location, a geography thing too, because in Vegas that would never be a thing. In like some other bigger cities, like like that wouldn't be who you're trying to be. Well, like that's not a conversation that people have. So
that's a good observation about the impact of the cultural dynamic of geography, of setting, because you're exactly right. In a different area, and including a more urban area than I'm in, that's a good point. I think you're right.
Yeah, I mean, dressing up it's all contextual, right? So it's, I don't know. I think it might be a weird thing. I wanted to, John, you were about to make a point whenever I cut you off. What were we going to say?
Well, because I just want to go back real quick, because I'm already kind of like, getting myself in trouble. Let me take another step towards getting myself in trouble. Because, but Eric, you make a really good point. I think it's an important point. This is one that I'm trying to say into a mirror, because I think we all struggle with this as people, including us as guys, even though we don't talk about it as much. And I think that for trying to get healthier, both physically and psychologically, unfortunately, because of our culture, because of media, there's too much of a connection between physical appearance and our value as people and sense of worth. And I think that is not healthy, that's toxic, and that we really need to come to that sense of acceptance, self-compassion, valuing ourselves, having a sense of self-worth that is not based only on our physical appearance or on trying to appear like some artificial or impossible standard. So I really like that analogy of, guess what? The numbers on the scale aren't going to matter if you can't look at yourself in the mirror, and be happy. And that's one of my criticisms with the term, Josh, like that you threw out, of the body positivity movement. So let me give the steel position of this before I shoot myself in the foot and get myself in trouble. I really do think that we need to have a sense of body positivity, that regardless of how our physical appearance might be, regardless of our body stature, I really think that, we need to have a place of being very accepting of that, affirming of that, and not basing our sense of worth on our body composition and physical appearance. So I really think that part of body positivity is very healthy, very important. I think that unfortunately, now going back to talking about health and not talking about aesthetics, beauty, attractiveness, and cultural scripts, the part that is sort of bothering me is that when people are making the argument of there's this slogan that's out there, I'm not going to talk about the specific movement or group, but it's, it says, well, you can be healthy at any size. That's not 100% accurate, and that's dangerously inaccurate. So at a certain size, should you be positive about yourself and be accepting of who you are as a person? Fuck yeah. You shouldn't look down on yourself ever for, whether you have certain issues with your body or with your appearance or maybe weight. That shouldn't be tied to a sense of psychological well-being and worth. But the idea that we shouldn't also be conscious of the way that certain ways that we treat our body or our body's composed might not pose health problems is, I think, a dangerous one, because you hear this and people go, well, you know what? My grandpa smoked every day and he lived to be like 104. Well, guess what? Good for him. He's a statistical anomaly, because most people that continue to smoke die. So, you could have this where, well, so-and-so weighs 450 pounds and they're incredibly healthy. Yeah, but you know what? Most people are probably not going to be that case. And Josh, I want to ask you about this real quick, because now, again, I'm very impressed with strongman people. I really am. Like we said before, I mean, it's just amazing athletes, an amazing example of what the body can do. But I've watched some documentaries and specials that weren't slamming it, but show that even though they're incredibly physically active and healthy in some respects, that actually causes some health problems, even though they're very physically fit and active. There's just, there's just certain, and again, I'm not slamming that sport or anything, but eventually, with certain size and with certain composition, most bodies are going to run the risk. Now, you might always have one person that's like, hey, I've never had a health problem ever. But even people that have been successful athletes, if they're athletes of certain stature, eventually health issues come up. So I don't know. I'm both kind of positive on the body positivity thing, but there's a part of me where I'm like, okay, yes, it shouldn't be tied to physical, emotional health, acceptance, and well-being. But join the real world and realize that you might need to take better care of yourself. But I don't know your reaction.
I think so. I want to speak to your comments about being healthy at any size, or I'm 450 pounds and I'm fine. Like, I get all these tests done. The thing is with that, it's like our bodies are made of systems and things like that, checks and balances, much like an automobile. And I really hate to equate us like an automobile, but an automobile works until it doesn't. And that's exactly what the human body does. Yeah, you may be 450 pounds and eat KFC every day, and you go to the doctor, and every time your cholesterol is low, your cholesterol is low, your cholesterol is low, until it won't. Until you go one time and it won't be. And that's when shit starts going wrong. That's whenever everything just goes downhill. And I think that's the misconception that, well, I'm just going to be healthy all the time. No, you're not. You're not going to be healthy all the time. Speaking of strongman, as you mentioned, like, you're right. I've put on close to 50 pounds in a year, which is a lot of weight. And while, yes, I actually just had a competition last weekend, did really well, won in my division, but this next, like, probably 4 or 5 months, I'm actually going to spend losing weight, because the human body isn't supposed to carry that much weight. I'm up to about 220 or 325, which I started around 275. So I put on almost about 50 pounds, right? And a lot of it's muscle, but whenever you're carrying around muscle, it's still taxing the body. So these strongman guys too, a lot, and we're putting our bodies through a lot of stress. And yes, it is exercise, but a lot of times that you're still stressing the body. And if your body can only take it for a certain amount of time, like powerlifting, bodybuilding, strongman, they joke it, and it's not an old man sport. It's not a longevity sport for a lot of people. Like, you may continue lifting afterwards, but if you're not careful, your body's wrecked. I mean, Rodney Coleman, who was Mr. Olympia like so many times, like, he still lifts, but the dude's broke his back like so many times. Like, he has a hard time moving. And I can tell you, I have a hard time moving now. Like, I'm going through this issue because I put on so much weight so quickly that my body hasn't adapted to it. And I can't walk very far without my back. It's called back pump, essentially, where your core is not as strong as it needs to be, and you rely on your back muscles. And anyway, I can't walk that far. So that's my next goal, is to lose weight and to strengthen those things. But even still, I wasn't eating very well while I was training. You just eat a lot. So, like, changing that up, and this body positivity movement is good in some senses, but I think it's creating some unrealistic ideals for bigger folks, particularly. What I think is interesting, I want to add to that, is I also make the argument that the body positivity movement is mostly for women. You don't see the same celebration for large men. And when I say large men, I mean men that are not like dad bods or like physically fit. They're just normal dudes, right? Like, or heavy dudes. It's not the same kind of enthusiasm for that. And I'll give you an example of even big muscular dudes that, like, this changing narrative is they made a new Thor for the game God of War. They created a new image for Thor, and he looks like strongman. He has a belly. He has some meat on him. People went ape shit because they're so used to the Chris Hemsworth version that this notion of Thor being this big, lumbering man would be outrageous, like, just unrealistic. When in actuality, a lot of people who still follow Norse mythology or the religion, I guess, are like, no, this is a little more accurate. So we have an unrealistic notion of strength and power when it comes to body as well, that in powerlifting and strongman, the notion of mass moves mass. So strength often comes with mass. Guys that are ripped, I'm not taking away some guys that are ripped, like Ronnie Coleman. He was really strong. The dude was really, really strong. And there are a lot of bodybuilders who are super ripped who are really strong, but that's not always the case. But if you have a lot of mass, you're typically going to have a little more strength too. So it's this weird, like, mix of, when we're talking about body positivity, of like, okay, yes, it is unhealthy, but you're going to have strength, and our notions of strength are skewed, especially for men. Our notions of what is healthy is skewed for men. Our notions of what's beautiful or pretty or attractiveness is skewed a lot for men. Like, I feel like men, the notion of male attractiveness is this very narrow window, right, with very little margins on the side. It's changing a little bit, but we still have these very, very skewed narratives about what it is to be an attractive male, whereas women, it's a little far ranging, I think, just in the comparison. So I don't think the body positivity movement has made it over to men just yet.
I mean, that's a fair point. And again, so yeah, I think that I just want to make this, kind of point again, real quick, just for anybody that might take notice of this or value, is that both things are true. It's like both parts of these statements are accurate, which is, I believe it is best if we as people get to a place where the value and worth that we hold ourselves in is not based on our physical appearance or body composition. We need to kind of like be able to value and love ourselves and see ourselves as having worth and dignity, regardless of any any current state of our body. So kind of that sense of, I'm a very chunky guy. I need to kind of find a way to love me and all my fat rolls. But that's as far as the self-image, self-acceptance, self-compassion. So that's being, kind of being very, positive about my sense of identity and worth as a person, and not basing that on my appearance. And then also realizing that paying attention to health is a different issue. And just like Eric said, that doesn't mean that our body has to get to a particular weight or size or things like that. But we also then just shouldn't sort of throw out the, well, as long as I feel good about me, then I'll just be healthy. No, because like we talked about before, unfortunately, as guys, we don't take care of ourselves very well. And I resemble that remark. I'm like the poster child for it. So I need to be kind of like saying this into a mirror to myself. But that's why we don't, that's why we develop more health-related issues. You know, we don't live as long. So both things can be true. Take better care of our health and realize that our worth and value doesn't and shouldn't be based on our physical appearance and body composition. And my hope would be that everyone else, and especially maybe kind of say women, would kind of get to that place too of being able to come to a greater sense of self-worth, self-acceptance, self-compassion, regardless of their body composition or physical appearance.
I've always found, you know, you talked about a lot of the women, you know, they say, well, I dress up for me. And, you know, a lot of them do want attention from the way that they dress, whether it's from men or women or whatever. You know, that attention kind of validates how they feel. You know, because feeling pretty, if you don't get other people to agree with you or to acknowledge, oh, you look nice today, or, you know, that sort of feedback or that validation, you know, the feeling pretty, I don't know. When I see somebody that's attractive, you know, if it's just a random person, you'll never hear me tell them about it. If you're attractive, chances are you know it by now. You know, and if I go up and say something to somebody about being attractive, you know, their first thought is, well, they just want to sleep with me. No, you know, that's not the purpose, not the reason why I mentioned that. You know, so I don't know, it's kind of a strange way that I don't know how to interact with people when they're like, yeah, I just I want to be put on a pedestal, but I don't want that attention. You know, it's kind of a double standard type thing. But
yeah, and it's funny, like now it's too easy to pick on us as guys. So I'm not excusing us as guys. We have a whole lot of shit that we can poke fun at, and it's all deserving. So I'm not taking a jab at women here because we could not only take a jab, we could do a whole jab cross hook on guys. I mean, so, but it is interesting because it kind of like, you can almost boil it back down to what is seen as desirable, and then how does that translate to influence, status, you know, kind of power and dominance. Because if anything, so some of that might be appearance, but I've noticed, and so now because Josh has me thinking about like Vegas versus, you know, the Midwest, but it's like even with certain clothes or with certain material, there's something about material, the way it lays and the type of material it is that ties into a sense of desirability or preference or status for women. So there's all of these different conversations and noticing about, oh my gosh, well, that looks good on you, especially the cutter. That's a material. Oh, it's so soft. And then there's even a sense of like, you know, we're hunters and gatherers, and generally the guys tend to be hunters and the women are the gatherers, the foragers. I think it's built in. If that could be a deal. I've noticed that another status thing is, oh my gosh, that's so nice. That's so fancy. Oh, well, guess what? I got it on clearance for like 13 cents. Oh my gosh, I can't believe you got it for so low. You know, there's this almost either it goes one direction. There's either this constant status thing of I got something that's very desirable and appealing, but I got it for like next to nothing, or look at this, it's desirable. It cost $80,000 and I have 4 of them. And so it kind of goes back to that, but it kind of goes back to, again, it's not always just about, maybe kind of, physical attractiveness, but if we just broaden it to kind of desirability and the way that connects to status, influence, or dominance, is that there's this whole sort of culture that goes around, oh my gosh, that's so nice. I wish I had it. Oh, I can't believe you have it. I can't believe you got it and I don't have it. So there's this whole kind of interesting thing happening that I'm not criticizing it. I just think we need to kind of make it more kind of conscious so that we can smile at it. It's not a bad thing. I think it's just a human thing. But I think because the more that if we could see this stuff, then maybe it wouldn't have as much of an impact on us. Now, let me throw an arrow back at us so I don't get criticized for being like a sexist or misogynist, because I'm not. Guys do the exact same bullshit with hobbies and high cost possessions. Look at this car, look at this engine, look at this boat, look at, like some people have a hunting cabin that costs more than my house, so it tends to be a little bit more on, it's different status stuff. But the amazing thing is as people, we're driven by all of this, and all of it is connected to a sense of desirability, maybe attractiveness and beauty. But we just don't always put it into words. It's like Josh said earlier, it's like the advertising is having an effect on us, and we know it is, but we can't say exactly why, and we're not willing to give it up, because I think as people, it's just something that we've been playing out since the beginning of time. Look at these shiny rocks I have, and I have these rocks and you don't.
Well, I mean, going to dive into early sociology here. We actually do. We have words for that. It's two of them actually: pecuniary emulation and conspicuous consumption. Right? Pecuniary emulation was this idea of, I want to be perceived as the class above me, which you do see a lot. You see people who buy products who to be perceived at a higher class. I think that's why we have debt problems so much, is that we buy things that we can't really afford for the image of being a higher class, and we get those images from, going to the fashion industry, or, in a lot of those different industries. You can go to the rich, and particularly celebrities. We'll talk about fashion particularly, right? So a fashion designer gets this supermodel or famous person to wear their clothes for a hot minute, and suddenly now they're mass produced, right? And people go out and buy them. And what happens the next day? The celebrity's wearing a completely different outfit, different clothes, different stuff like that. So that pushes people to continuously buy these clothes. Like the fact that we have fashion seasons, oh, that's out of season. Like that baffles the shit out of me. Because men have like 3 different types of shirts that we can buy. Like, what is it? A polo, a t-shirt, and a button down, and that's it. Like, and then there's jeans or slacks. Like, we have so few options when it comes to clothes. Whereas women have, blouses that are different styles, different colors, different styles and colors, it just goes on and on and on. There's expectation that you buy this. And there's a social pressure that if you're out of season, that means you bought it, or you're wearing old clothes. So there's this push to buy new clothes to be perceived as this higher class. And then so whenever they are consuming, it's this idea of conspicuous consumption, where they buy clothes and present these notions of wealth on purpose. And I think we do still have a lot of that, where we want to be perceived as a higher class. We want to consume in a way that's going to make us, have a higher status, and we want people to notice. And the way people notice is whenever you buy the latest thing, they'll buy the fashion. And men do that with gadgets. I feel like I'm a gadget guy. I like gadgets and stuff. I feel like, we have to have the newest phone. We have to have the newest this, the newest that. So men aren't exempt from this. It's just women, it's often from fashion. Guys, it's gadgets and things like that. So I definitely think this sense of attractiveness and just going back to this notion of beauty, I feel like beauty nowadays is almost an archaic idea, because it's all about brand and aesthetic and what is attractiveness, not beauty. Like true beauty, true sense of awe and pausing for a moment beauty is almost, like I said, almost an old ideal in some ways.
Yeah, I think you're right. And so maybe that might be, again, the way that we have unfortunately combined beauty with the idea of desirability. Because to me now, as you were talking, Josh, and again, we all have this, guys might have some general themes, women might have some general themes, but we all have themes. So it's not like one group has the other doesn't. But because I was thinking, even with, like you talked about, like with clothes, part of it comes down to almost a sense of competency that signals to others, like you're talking about class, but also kind of competence that, look, I have the fashion that fits me, that fits this setting, that fits this season. So that shows that I'm smart, that I have good taste, that I'm knowledgeable. I'm able to put these things together, these fashions together in a way that's desirable. So there's a type of competence that goes into that. Maybe going back to those interviews I was talking about, these women were judging almost the competence of the way that these female candidates were presenting themselves. Whereas for guys, it means that we have to have this gadget with this modification, and we've got this rare tool that has this job, and we can bring guys into the shop and go, oh, and look at this, shelf, and oh my gosh, I can't believe you have one of those. And it's like that sense of, how does this sometimes make me desirable? Because it makes me seem successful and competent, which also could tie into class, which is, hey, look, I'm a certain position, I have a certain, kind of wealth or competence or influence. And then you just get to a position like me where I've become both comfortable with myself, both physically and psychologically, and I'm also just getting old and I really don't give a shit. So like I've quit wearing dress shoes unless I have to go to like the funeral home or court or like a wedding. So it's like even at school, I'm like, I might put on slacks, but I'm wearing tennis shoes because I'm like, life is too short to wear uncomfortable shoes. And I'm like, you know what? Until they tell me not to wear tennis shoes, I'm just going to wear tennis shoes. It's like I don't, maybe I don't. Now, there's also things though that maybe I would look at and say, oh, I find that desirable, or I see that as a desirable trait in others, or see it as a sign of competence. Mine just anymore doesn't have to do with fashion or as many items or stuff like that, because I'm like, I got clothes on, that's a good start. I'm like, I don't care what they are. I mean, like I'm not showing up naked. That would be bad. So as long as
what do you want from me?
That's right. Hey, I've got clothes on. What more do you want from me? So I think that part of it does come down to that, though, is just how do we sort of see if we fit in with other people, compare with other people, or maybe try to set ourselves apart from other people in all those different ways, whether it's class or competency or things like that.
Yeah. And I'm trying to take this back to this notion of beauty, because that's where we started. And I don't know, I feel it. I just keep coming back to the notion of, we get these standards from people, but I think there is still an objective beauty that can be strived for, or at least, well, I don't know, strive for, because that makes it sound like you should be striving for a sense of beauty. But maybe Eric's right. Maybe that beauty is what you see in the mirror, right? So sure, you can add an aesthetic on top of who you are, but maybe that sense of beauty is more internal and something more holistic rather than just an aesthetic.
You're talking about beauty is something that's, kind of makes you awestruck. I think it has to do with being such a contrast that it gets your attention. Something that, it can play into attractiveness because it's attracting your attention. Something that is beautiful is something that you notice. It's something that sticks out. So it doesn't always have to be, a physical thing. I mean, we take in the world with our senses, and ideally you want to be appealing to people's every sense. You don't want to be stinky. You don't want to be ugly, offensive to the eye. You don't want to have an annoying voice. I mean, you want to be appealing to the way that people perceive you. So I think that's where we get so much, a lot of the beauty standards and a lot of the advertising, they try to cater to, this product makes you smell better, this product makes you look better, just I think, just to be, like I said, more appealing to the senses. I think that would, I don't know, it might have something to do with beauty and.
I think it does, because actually, I mean, so, and to bring it back, like you're talking about, Josh, because I do think it's a important and a fair point, and maybe that sense of going to the senses. So as you were talking, and maybe kind of that sense of something that's more natural or objective, the last image in my mind that comes to me that I was just taken by this sense of beauty is it's been about 2 weeks ago now. I was sitting outside on the shore of a lake. And there was just this moment because it was getting later in the afternoon. The sun was going down, but the sun was sort of off to the left, so it wasn't right in my eyes. And so then the sky, though, was sort of clear and getting a golden tint. The water was still, it was reflecting the trees that were along the bank. There was just this moment and this image of clarity and crispness and just colors, edges, textures, just the whole thing. And I think that, maybe whenever something not only engages our senses, like Eric's saying, but brings to us a sense of inspiration. And in fact, I think it can actually go two different directions of inspiration. As Eric was talking, that it can inspire us towards a sense of peace, tranquility, stillness, calmness, or it can inspire us towards a sense of creativity and action. So sometimes beauty moves us to want to engage it and to act and maybe even sort of create, or other times it helps us to feel still and calm. But it really seems to come about because of some way that it has engaged our senses. So maybe, Eric, you're a good point. And so physically people can do that too with their appearance, and with, like you said, all the things, their appearance, their smells, it just sort of boom catches us in our senses. But beyond just physical attraction to people, that also can come from moments that we engage in, or settings that we see, where what hits us with beauty is the way that it just coordinates our senses with a sense of clarity. That's what sort of comes to me.
I think, I want to build on that, because what popped in my head was Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. There's a great line in there where he talks about notions of beauty. He was like, there's some people who find beauty in a sunset or painting, something like that, and there's people who find beauty in the schematics of a toaster. And I think you're right. I think there's some elements to that, to where, does it elicit the sense of what does it elicit in you? Like, does it create this sense of awe or this sense of clarity, or what have you, and things like that? And I think maybe it can come from other places, not just this sense of a certain aesthetic, so, but rather these different types of locations, for sure. I don't know. All right, so any final thoughts on beauty?
Yeah, I think if you look at it in terms of self-worth, kind of what we got into earlier, I've always encouraged people to look at themselves as like a beautiful park. People that visit the park, they're more likely to not litter. They're not going to tear things up. They're going to respect the place. They're going to treat it as a thing of beauty. Whereas, if your sense of self-worth reflects like a junkyard. If you have a low opinion of yourself, if people walk through a junkyard, they're going to break things. They're going to treat it disrespectfully. They're like, oh, it's already a mess. So the way that you perceive yourself and the way that you portray yourself will always set the standard on how people should treat you. So, when you're thinking of terms of beauty and self-worth, I think, finding that place where you can feel your value, and kind of portray yourself that way, to know your value and set that standard on how people should treat you.
John?
It's hard to follow that. That's a great analogy, Eric. Because one that came to me, like what you were talking as well, I think that's a wonderful way of thinking about it is, and again, I'm saying this to myself, is that, people go, oh, well, treat your body like a temple. And so I always say, well, my body is more like a sleazy dive down the dark alley of a bad neighborhood on the wrong side of the tracks. So that's the way it is. But hopefully, if we can continue to identify and filter through and disconnect from some of these unconscious but yet unreasonable expectations that we put on ourselves because our culture and society has put them on ourselves, if we can let go of some of that, then hopefully we can come to a place where emotionally, psychologically, and physically, we can treat ourselves like temples. And I think that when we can do that, when we can filter through and let go of some of that other stuff and psychologically and physically begin to treat ourselves as temples, I think it becomes easier to notice the beauty that is in the world.
Yeah. I think there should be a pursuit of beauty, much like the bohemian lifestyle, of the late 1800s, early 1900s, like pursuing this sense of beauty within self. Don't pursue a sense of aesthetic, but a sense of beauty. If they go hand in hand, that's fine, but make sure beauty is what's driving, not the appeal to others, but rather try to find this almost global sense of beauty within yourself and how you pursue, how you project that outwardly, rather than, your brand or your image to fit in or to, for conspicuous consumption, rather than, rather this idea of being a good person or being this like thing that creates awe or clarity in other people. If you can, I don't know if people would call us beauty or not. I feel like we're all over the place. Our sense of clarity is, I don't know. Are we pretty clear, guys? Maybe.
Yeah, I
don't
think so.
Who knows? Maybe. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, guys.
Yeah, it's good talk.
Yeah. All right. See you guys next time.
It was a beautiful conversation.
Okay, maybe I'm all over the place. My brain kind of gets weird after I go to the gym. All right. Well, again, so thanks for joining us, FlyOverThinkers. As always, you can click, like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Send us emails on flyoverthinkers@gmail.com. We're going to keep pushing ahead and keep making this content. Hopefully people still enjoy it.
And we have some ideas for future conversations. So we still have some ideas in the bullpen, but we would love to hear some ideas and potential topics from all of you listening as well.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. All right. We'll see you next time.
Yeah. See you guys.
Bye, everyone.